eventually make their way down to Casco Bay. So having healthy urban streams means we'll have better water quality downstream. It's also important for wildlife, even though these streams, are in highly developed areas, there's still important wildlife that lives in them. Here's a photo of some turtles in Capissic Pond. And also, they're important for recreation. A lot of our recreational trails in Portland are located along water bodies, so having healthy streams makes those recreational trails better. And then related to that is property values. So having healthy streams and healthy water bodies in general has been shown. There's been a lot of studies and economic research to show that it improves property value. And then it's also very important for flood resilience. So here's a photo of an urban stream here in Portland, and you can see it has a nice wide floodplain. So when there's a lot of flooding, having this wide floodplain is really important to protect, other infrastructure because it kind of mitigates and softens any big flood impacts that we have. And so it really does take all of us to pitching in and doing our part to promote healthy streams. So here's kind of a satellite image of Portland. You can see the city limits shown in white. And you can see that it's probably no surprise that Portland is made up of a bunch of tiny residential areas. There's not huge tracts of land. There's, Evergreen Cemetery, Baxter Woods, and the Prom and Deering Oaks Park, which are big chunks of land. But most of the city is made up of tiny residential areas. So in order to have healthy streams, everyone kind of needs to do their part collectively in order to promote healthy streams. And Portland is made up of a couple of watersheds. There are three kind of main areas of Portland that are highlighted on this map that are also shown on the left here. There's the Presumpscot River, which kind of the northern portion of the city you can see in this tan color drains into. And Dole Brook, which is shown here, is a kind of well-known stream. It runs through Riverside Golf Course. Is part of that Presumpscot River watershed. Then there's also Back Cove, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. And so the yellow areas shown on the map here are the areas that drain into Back Cove. And this includes Fall Brook, shown in brown, which is an urban stream here in Portland. And then there's the Fore River, which kind of takes the rest of Portland. And that includes several smaller watersheds, including Capissic Brook, Nason's Brook, which starts up in Westbrook, the Stroudwater River, and then also it's not labeled here, but Long Creek is another stream that I'm sure you've heard of that all drains into the Fore River. So that's kind of the layout of the different streams here in Portland. And so I encourage you to, if you live in Portland, look up exactly where you live and try to determine which watershed you're in. And I'll share some resources at the end that kind of will help you do that because it's important to stay connected and understand how you fit within the broader environmental system in order to determine how you can improve water quality. And so here I'm kind of gonna talk about this issue of eutrophication. And so the question is, how do we get here? And so here's a photo of Back Cove, I believe from 2017, showing an algae bloom. Again, these are caused by excess nutrients in the water. And then here is kind of a screenshot of algae bloom in a freshwater system. And this, it was taken at a DEP monitoring site located, here's Brighton Avenue, and then here's kind of the Capissic Pond and Capissic Street. So it's taken at a freshwater site on Capissic Brook. And so these are both, and I believe this one's from 2003. And so these are both kind of symptoms of nutrient over-enrichment. And in marine systems like Back Cove, it's nitrogen that's the dominant nutrient. And in freshwater systems, it's phosphorus. So I'm going to kind of go into some more background on that here in a moment. So the question of how we got here is initially, before Portland was developed and settled, this is kind of a diagram that shows what a typical stream environment looks like. So you have, forested watershed, and as a result of this forested watershed, you have really high water quality in streams and wetlands and ponds. And so what this high water quality allows is it allows for a lot of healthy macroinvertebrates, little aquatic insects to be found in the river. And so you have the three ones that you commonly find in a healthy stream are mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies. And those are all shown here. And so when you have healthy macroinvertebrate community, you have they're kind of serve as lower down on the food web as a base of it, and it supports other animals like songbirds who eat insects, as well as small fish who eat these macroinvertebrates, and then also large birds that eat the fish. So you kind of have a balanced ecosystem versus flash forward to what Portland looks like to today, and you see that we have a highly developed watershed. You have a lot of residential development, and as a result, you have a lot of land conversion from forests to residential lawns. You also have a lot of impervious cover, which is essentially all paved or concrete surfaces where water can't percolate into the soil. And so it forms runoff in the form of stormwater, which then discharges into our waterways. You also can have, as a result of, deforestation, you can have increased erosion shown here, which adds, and all of this, the conversion from forest to lawn, the extra impervious surfaces, as well as the increased erosion, all adds nutrients to our waterways. And so what this, as kind of the photos I showed earlier, uh, indicate, when you have these excess nutrients, you can get these excess algae growth, nuisance algal blooms forming in the waterways, and this can change the composition of the macroinvertebrate community. So you start to lose kind of the songbirds and other animals that rely on the macroinvertebrates as a food source. You also can lose some of the fish species as the water quality degrades. Sometimes with these algae blooms, you get lower dissolved oxygen levels. And then you also can lose kind of the other, it kind of has a cascading effect across the food web. And so what you're left with is an impaired stream that lacks the ecosystem services and benefits that a healthy stream provides. And another common problem in urban streams is that because of all this impervious cover, essentially what can happen is you have this natural stream with the hydrodynamics of a regular stream, and it can be turned into what essentially becomes a glorified stormwater drain, where because of all this hard surfaces, when it rains, that water rushes off into stormwater and then goes right through the system quickly, rather than in a natural system, you'd get groundwater recharge where the water would soak into the soil. So we often find in urban streams that late in the summer, when it's really dry, the plants are, growing, that you don't get that a lot of these streams in urban areas can dry out because the groundwater levels have been depleted. So, and this is particularly an issue in Fallbrook in Portland. So that's another kind of concern that happens that is found in urban streams. So in an effort to try to fix that, Portland, it is a very proactive city and has various regulations and programs in place to try to protect water quality in urban streams. And so one particular that I'm going to focus on, and it's kind of the focus of this webinar, is the land care ordinance. And this applies to, all sorts of residential lands. It applies to lawns, gardens, other landscaped areas, patios, driveways, sidewalks, public parks, and athletic fields. And there are a few kind of exceptions, but for the most part, all of these areas in Portland are covered under the land care ordinance. And some background on that ordinance, it began as a pesticide use ordinance in 2019 that banned the use of synthetic pesticides in order to protect, wildlife and water quality. And then in March of 2023, it was updated to include some prohibitions on fertilizer, and it was kind of renamed to be what is now known as the Land Care Ordinance. And so some important provisions of that Land Care Ordinance is that it bans synthetic fertilizer application, and allows organic fertilizer application, but you have to take a soil test before you can apply fertilizer to show that your lawn or your garden really does need that fertilizer. So this test, if it shows that you're lacking nitrogen, then you're allowed to use an organic fertilizer that lacks phosphorus, and you're not allowed to add a fertilizer that has phosphorus unless the soil test shows that you need phosphorus. And another important aspect of this ordinance is that it prevents the application of any pesticides or fertilizer within 75 feet of any water bodies or wetlands. So that ensures, that we protect the water quality in these areas. And then it also doesn't allow the application of fertilizer in specific instances, including when the ground is saturated or frozen, when it's actively raining or there's forecasted heavy rain. So that's to prevent it from just running off into the waterways. And then also during certain times of year when it's known that plants don't typically uptake nutrients, you're not supposed to apply these fertilizers. So that's kind of the background of the land care ordinance. And another program that Portland has in place that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the Stormwater Utility Program. And so I'm sure you're all familiar with every year in Portland, you got to pay the stormwater service charge. And that service charge is based on the impervious cover that you have on your property. So here's a diagram that shows all the areas in yellow that are counted towards impervious cover. So it's driveways, roofs, patios, walkways, any other kind of concrete or asphalt surface. And so based on what the area of that impervious surface is, you have to pay, that corresponds to what you pay for your stormwater service charge. But you can get credits to discount that stormwater service charge, and that's outlined. Portland has a great stormwater credit manual that outlines how you can do that. And here's a diagram from that manual that shows um, how that credit system works. So here's all the impervious surfaces on this particular example property, and the front half of the roof is treated using a rain garden. So all the water that drains there goes into a rain garden. So that counts towards their treated impervious area. And then there's the untreated back half of the roof and then the driveway. And so their total impervious area is 2,600 square feet. That amounts to about two stormwater billing units. And then they have the front half of the roof is about 900 square feet. And so using this kind of table, you can see that that falls in this range. So that equates to about a half a stormwater billing unit credit. So that this person who has this rain garden would have a reduced stormwater service charge. And that's kind of how the program incentivizes. It both funds stormwater projects that the city implements, and it also incentivizes landowners to install these stormwater control measures that I'll talk about in a minute as well. There's also other urban pollutants that I want to quickly go over. The two really popular or common ones that we see in urban streams is salt. We have a lot of impervious surfaces, so in the winter, a lot of salt gets applied, as an anti-icing agent. And then also bacteria is also high, and that can come from a lot of sources, but a really common one is pet waste, and you can see some photos here of pet waste being left behind in bags, and oftentimes a lot of times it's not picked up in the first place. So just to quickly dive in on the salt issue a little bit, the way we measure salt and how it's commonly measured in streams is through the device that measures conductivity, and that's the electrical current in the stream, and that's a really good proxy for the dissolved ions, including the salt, the chloride that's in the stream. And so here's a figure that is from Maine DEP of a site. It's not actually in Portland, it's in Falmouth. But it's a really good example of kind of how the salt issue works. So normally in a natural stream, we'd expect a conductivity level to be between 50 and 100 microsiemens per centimeter is the unit of conductance here. And so you can see the black, the blue, the red is just temperature, and the black is this conductivity. And so you can see the black is above this natural range because this Mill Creek in Falmouth is fairly developed. And it's important to note that you can see that this deployment period, where this logger was collecting this data, was from July through September, the beginning of September. And that's when actually, even though the salt is applied in the winter, that's where the late summer is actually when the salt problem kind of manifests. And I'm going to show you in the data kind of why that's the case. You can see these blue dots are indicating precipitation events, where it's, here, this is an example where it rained about an inch during this particular event. And so what you can see is the salt levels in the stream actually rise until you get a rain event, and then they go down. And then after the rain event, they continue rising again. And what this indicates is that the salt actually is found in groundwater. So when the salt is applied on roads and sidewalks in the winter, it seeps into the ground and kind of is stored and collects in the groundwater. And then late in the summer is when it kind of rears its ugly head, and you get it entering our urban streams when the water levels are lower, and you get these really high salt levels. And so any values above this 50 to 100, we would expect to kind of start to impact, the macroinvertebrates, the bugs, and the fish. But Maine DEP specifically has criteria for chloride of 230 milligrams per liter, which equates to about 900 microsiemens. So it's values that are a lot higher than this shown on the figure, but I've known from past looking at data within streams in Portland that there are values that frequently are above this 900 level in various urban streams. So this is a big issue in Portland specifically, and then also across urban streams broadly. But kind of getting into what we all can do in order to protect urban streams. So related to the salt issue, you can, just apply the bare minimum amount of salt on your walkways and sidewalks that you need. Less can be more in this regard. You can also pick up after your pets when you're walking your pets in the parks around town or on the sidewalk. Make sure you pick up, because individual pet waste has a lot of bacteria in it. And so it's actually can be a leading cause for this bacteria issue. And then also practicing good organic lawn care can also help limit the nutrients that flow into streams. So that includes aerating lawns to reduce the need for, pesticides and fertilizer, keeping, mowing your lawn frequently, but also keeping the grass fairly high is another good way you can protect water quality. Using compost, there's a great, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Garbage to Garden program. So using compost instead of fertilizer is a great option. And then also participating in community cleanups of trash. Certain types of trash, like tires and other things, can release toxic pollutants and various chemicals that impact our water bodies. And then additionally, kind of back to the stormwater utility program, I mentioned that you can install, various things like a rain garden to get credits. Here's a list of several residential BMPs that you can install on your property in order to get those stormwater credits. So it includes cisterns. So this is basically a big vat that can collect water from your gutters when it rains, and then during drier periods, you can use the water that's stored here to water your garden or various other things. A rain garden, so it's an aesthetically pleasing garden on your lawn that is shaped so that the water kind of flows towards it and collects, and then you can plant plants that can tolerate saturated soils. So that's what a rain garden is. A dry well, which is essentially an underground tank that can store water and then slowly release it over time as after a storm. And that's a good way to promote infiltration, which is the goal of what a lot of these stormwater BMPs do, and BMP stands for Best Management Practice. There's also a modified French drain, which works similarly to the dry well. And then also permeable pavers, which is essentially instead of a solid asphalt driveway, you can install something like these permeable pavers, which are essentially blocks that allow the water to infiltrate in between them, and that reduces the stormwater that's generated. And then, so these are all the ones that are referenced in that stormwater credit manual that Portland has. There are also other BMPs that you can install on your property that help protect water quality, but they're kind of dependent on the site. And those are riparian buffers. So if your property is located next to a pond or a stream, you can make sure you have, a lot of tall grasses, bushes, shrubs, and even small trees along the banks, and that can help filter out nutrients and pollutants. You can also install what's called a bioswale. It's essentially kind of like a stormwater ditch where stormwater collects and can flow, but you install various plants similar to rain garden plants that can survive in saturated soil within it, and so therefore the stormwater collects, and then also the plants uptake the nutrients and reduce the pollutants overall that are in the stormwater. So those are two other options that are really popular for stormwater management. And so circling back to this diagram that I shared earlier of this, impaired urban stream where we have high nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and as a result, that leads to the algal growth. And then we kind of have just generally a fairly dead stream here. And so, what the goal of all these programs, both the land care ordinance and the stormwater utility program, is so that we install a bunch of these and implement a bunch of these best management practices. So, this can look like cisterns, like I mentioned earlier, rain gardens, permeable pavers, bioswales to control and limit erosion and reduce nutrients, as well as riparian buffers, and then practicing healthy land care on all the lawns by not using synthetic pesticides and limiting fertilizer application. And so the goal of all these programs again is you have this urban stream and the land use is not going to change back into forests. So these are kind of various things that we can do to promote healthy streams and try to get it so that we can return the stream back to this healthy state where you have lower nutrients, a better, more robust macroinvertebrate community that supports higher trophic levels like fish and birds. So that's kind of the goal, and Portland's great in having these programs and ordinances in place. So I encourage you all to think about what you can do more so than you're already doing on your property to promote healthy streams. And with that, I'll gladly answer any questions that you have. Here's my email. Feel free to email me after the fact as well if you have any questions. And I also wanted to share some resources for you all via these links. And I know this video will be shared via YouTube later. So, Model My Watershed is a great mapping tool that you can use to map out where your property is located within a particular watershed. There's also DEP has a report page about their integrated report that shows, a map that shows all the impaired water bodies as well as the classifications. There's also DEP also has a web page for their biomonitoring program, and that's where they collect the data on the algae and the macroinvertebrates. So you can go to this web page and find a mapper there that shows all the streams in Portland and where all the stations are, like the one I showed earlier that had that algae growth. And then there's also several resources that the city of Portland has, including their land care webpage, as well as the stormwater credit manual that I referenced earlier. So these web pages also have a lot of great resources. And with that, I'll gladly answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. If people want to raise hands or if you just want to come off of mute, um, Um, yeah.
I'll let,
Lucy,
yeah,
or
I'll let Lucy
sorry.
go first. No, you're so good.
Hi, can you see me and hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is great. And I live in Freeport actually, and I wanted to tune into Portland and find out what's going on there. And it just sounds like really good work, and I appreciate it very much. And also looking to you as a resource for us here. Um, I was wondering if you have any examples of stormwater swales or bioswales uh, that are working well for us to visit.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm trying to think of, I know there's a lot of kind of green stormwater infrastructure is the term that's called. Portland has a ton. Um, so if you shoot me an email, I can kind of dig back through the information that I have and try to find some, specific addresses and locations. And I'd be happy to send those your way that you can go ahead and visit.
That's great, thanks. And I'm looking forward to looking at the stormwater credit manual, which you said
Yeah.
that's on your website.
hmm
Yep,
Yeah, and that's Portland has again this stormwater service charge program,
right.
and like I mentioned that so Portland has a lot of green infrastructure such as these swales and various other things on the Portland's public their land, their public property in the right of way and various things. So this service charge that people pay goes into a fund that essentially funds projects like that. So I think stormwater utilities, it's like kind of over the past, 10, 20 years, it's been really an emerging things that municipalities have used to try to raise funding and incentivize a lot of this green stormwater infrastructure.
That's really cool. I'm so interested in that. Um, yeah, so I'm looking forward to learning more. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Katie, did you have a question?
Yeah, and I think that is kind of a good segue. And also I guess to respond to Lucy too, I think we just did we host monthly webinars that are called Coffee and Climate, similar to this link or lunch break. And one of our most recent Coffee and Climates was about stormwater management, and it's a pretty good resource that we could share too. But my question for Luke is, I don't know if you want to, like, you could probably speak to this a little bit more, but in watching this, it just makes me think about how we are having more frequent rain and more flooding events that can really like impact our rivers. And yeah, I don't know if you're seeing other municipalities other than Portland kind of really start to think about stormwater. I don't know. That's just what I was thinking about while you were presenting.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point. And one of the biggest so obviously temperature, climate change, that's a very common, impact that is well known, well studied, well modeled into the future. But in the Northeast, one of the biggest impacts, like you mentioned, is more intense frequent storm events. And that actually stormwater is probably one of the biggest things that are kind of related that municipalities think of with that regard, in that a lot of the stormwater is kind of sized based on historical flood events. So a lot of municipalities are having to think about how they adapt the like parameters around which they size their stormwater, because now what was previously 100-year storm now happens maybe every like 10 years, now that these storms are a lot more intense in the Northeast. Um, so that's something that municipalities are having to think of, and Portland already, I know, incorporates that into their planning for stormwater infrastructure. And then secondly, just on lawns and various other things, you might notice that when you get these intense storm events, the rain doesn't really soak into the ground. It kind of more likely when you get rain over a short period of time runs off into the surface. It generates more of this storm water, and that carries more pollutants. um, so it's really important to have good, it makes having good stormwater infrastructure, particularly on properties, even more important, because you'll get in an intense rainstorm, you'll get kind of potentially these stormwater channels that might form in a lawn that don't normally form. So if you have like a rain garden or something, in place, that could be a good way to, prevent that water from going right into a storm drain in the street and then right to your stream. So having more, it just is going to become more and more important to have these stormwater infrastructure best management practices kind of distributed across the landscape as we're getting more and more intense storms.
It's really interesting. Did anyone else have other questions? Um, I was also curious to know, you briefly mentioned how like tires can also impact stream health, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that and what they do.
Yeah, so it's actually something that was discovered out on the West Coast initially. They were finding a lot of salmon that were dying in these streams, and they couldn't figure out why they were dying. And they were just popping up, in areas around road crossings. And what they determined is that there's this chemical in tires. And I believe, I might get this name wrong, but I believe it's 4-PPD quinone is the specific chemical. And so when you're tired, you drive along a road, the tire leaves a residue on the road, and then when it rains, that washes into waterways. And there are certain species of fish, like the salmon out west, that are really sensitive to it, and actually that was causing their mortality. And there's been studies that have dictated for what species what level amount of this compound is needed to cause mortality. Um, and Maine DP actually a couple years ago began sampling for this compound in our waterways, and they have that data. Um, and so they determined that it is in it, and it's in urban areas it is higher. Um, so it's something, it's like kind of an emerging pollutant that people are concerned about. And I know like tire manufacturers are starting to kind of figure out how to not include it in tires. I think some states might have bans on it and things like that. So it's an emerging pollutant concern, and I don't know if people have ever walked in urban streams. I've in a couple surveys I've done earlier in my careers, you often find like tires and crazy things in these urban streams. So that's just like one example of kind of a secondary toxic pollutant that we find among there's kind of a myriad of pollutants found in ordinary stormwater discharge, and that's kind of one example of of how it impacts, specific in an acute way, particular species of fish.
Hmm, that's really interesting. Did anyone else have questions? Well, well, if there aren't any more questions, um, feel free also to email us or to email Luke with more questions. We will send out a recording of this. You can also view all of our previous webinars on YouTube. Thank you very much, Luke, for this presentation. It was very thorough and very informative. Um, yeah,
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out with questions on my email there.
excellent. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.